Greg Nibbler with Fox 12 Oregon. The Tiffany Hill Act that was passed into law in the state of Washington allows for courts in certain cases to require domestic abusers wear ankle monitoring hardware, which then connects to software, which can notify victims if they come within a certain range. To Watch Monitoring is one of the companies that actually provides that software and hardware. And I'm speaking now to Ken and Fidelis. Ken, to start with you, talk to us about this entire system, how it works, and then how that connects into the tech as well to make this all happen.
Well, that's more than one question there, Greg. Thanks for asking, but it's a pretty complex issue that we're dealing with, and so there's lots of moving parts to this. But first of all, I'm the president of To Watch Monitoring, and being here with Fidelis today, he's our EHM vice president, who has worked in conjunction and very closely with Clark County after this very important legislation. The Tiffany Hill bill was passed by Senator Wilson. Senator Wilson's always been a huge advocate on domestic violence, and unfortunately, that this incident happened. But fortunately, from the standpoint, we've been finally able to get some legislation passed because of it, and that's why the bill's after Tiffany Hill. And so Fidelis and a gentleman by the name of Brian Farrell, who's the court administrator with Clark County, really rolled their sleeves up when this bill was passed and put a lot of work into the program. Brian started out by just vetting out the technology because, the technology has to work for this program to be effective. And we've always had GPS ankle bracelets that we can put on people. A lot of times in a domestic violence case, there's also no contact orders. That's been the standard practice. But with this new technology, which is an Empower app that the victim now has, we know in a relationship where the victim and the offender are at the same time. So after Brian vetted it out, contacted us, we worked hand and foot together. He and Fidelis went around and interviewed and trained and taught all the different aspects of law enforcement in Clark County. It's CRESA, the 911, the prosecutors, the judges, the police, sheriff's department, et cetera, to make sure that everybody knew exactly how the program worked, because the technology does not work on its own. You've got to have a process and procedures put into place, a program it's fail-proof. And the technology is not a silver bullet. And a lot of legislators and people in the courts are looking for silver bullets to this program. And it doesn't work that way. It takes a lot of work. And Clark County now has the template along with us, how the program works. And there's been additional funding put in by Senator Wilson, another $1.9 million to help the courts that are dealing with indigent folks. So this program can be made available to anybody and everybody within the state of Washington. So a lot of thought and a lot of work's been put into this. And we've been doing this for about a year and a half now. And I think understanding more about the technology and how the process works is really important for people to understand. And Fidelis is going to show us and talk to us a little bit more about that.
Yes. So the ankle bracelet that the offender would be fitted with, this is the device that we use in Clark County. This is called the ReliAlert XC4. It is a GPS enabled bracelet that has a cell phone built inside of it. Some of the key features of this device that sets it apart from other GPS bracelets out in the field is that it has a cell phone built inside of it. There's a microphone in the device that the offender can talk back to the monitoring center. The speaker is broadcast through here. It also has a siren built inside of the unit as well. These features and functions play into the protocol of when alerts are triggered, that there's calls that are made to the offender, letting them know that they're in violation, as well as setting off a siren. There's a 95 decibel siren that's emitted from this device. It's very loud. Something that we've seen throughout our presentations with law enforcement that they found as a very functional and key function for them is the ability to patch into the unit. They can talk to the offender. They also have access to see where they are at. So this unit's tracking the person every 1 minute, putting their location on a map. It's looking to see where they are within relation to where a victim is located at. I'm going to show you what the Empower app looks like for the victim. So a victim would be able to participate in the program, and they would get an Empower app on their phone. By them having this, it allows them to be shown into our GPS software and the GPS software will track where they are within relation to the offender, and vice versa, where the offender is in relation to the victim. So as alerts are created from the GPS bracelet that the offender is wearing, such as the stationary exclusion zone, these stationary exclusion zones are set around the victim's residence, place of work, it could be the children's school. This is all driven by a no contact order that's put in place by the court. So that tells us the distance that they are not permitted to come within, such as 1,000 feet. That's pretty standard that it's going to be 1,000 feet for the stationary zone. And on top of that, there's an early warning part of the zone that's called the exclusion buffer zone. So when the offender comes within that distance and they break this exclusion buffer zone, there's a push notification, text message, and an email that will be received on the victim's app. So they're getting notified immediately of this. At the same time, once the offender reaches that inner zone, the 1,000 feet that's driven by a no contact order, once that is entered, 911 is getting called by our monitoring center. The monitoring center notifies them there's a protection order violation in progress. Their local 911 in Clark County is called CRESA, and CRESA will dispatch to the local law enforcement, whether it's Vancouver PD or it's the Sheriff's Department. They get the call that there's a violation of a protection order in progress. Those officers have all been trained on how to access the software to identify the location of where the offender is at, and they can go arrest them and take them back into custody for this new law violation. There is also some really key urgent alerts that are created if an offender is tampering with this bracelet. Now, this bracelet has a steel secure cuff on it. It's got a steel band that goes through the inside. There's some other technology inside there to identify when tampering is happening. This is really important for a victim because if the offender escapes out of the bracelet, it is unable to identify when they are near. Same thing goes for this. They will get a push notification to their cell phone, a text message, and an email so that they can take immediate action and activate their safety plan. One thing I missed for the application that the victim receives is that there is some panic. There's a panic button on the front home screen, and there's also a dispatch button. These phone numbers are pre-programmed to reach 911, and the other phone number is pre-programmed to reach someone that's a part of their emergency plan.
With this being available now, through the Tiffany Hill Act over, I think you mentioned over the last year or so that you've been working there with Clark County to have this out there, have there been cases of success where this has actually worked to help protect a victim?
There has. There's been quite a few arrests of where people have gone to the person's house and law enforcement was able to pick them up and take them back into custody.
What are some of the reasons that other counties in the state of Washington haven't been utilizing this technology?
There's a number of reasons. One is awareness, and that's a program that we've been involved with. Again, Senator Davis has been chairing this, leading this charge, putting together Zoom calls with a lot of the players throughout the state, courts, different people within the courts, law enforcement, attorneys, et cetera, trying to educate everybody, getting their feedback, getting their buy-in to doing this, because every jurisdiction does things differently. Sometimes it can be the court administrator that's leading the charge on something like this. Sometimes it can be the chief of the police, chief of police, the jail people. It's always somebody different. So it's not one size fits all because there's so many different people that we have to contact on this. That's one of the bigger challenges, just to educate people on this. The other has been funding, because not only that, a lot of jurisdictions, if they want everybody to be able to have this, shouldn't be just for somebody who can afford it, gets out of jail, but indigent folks should be able to have this. And so there's been grant money being made available to people. And like I said earlier, Senator Wilson passed some legislation to get some extra money out there as well. And then a third part of it is some of these programs takes additional work, which means you have to hire additional people, which means you got to need a budget for it. And they'll say, we don't have a budget to do this extra work. So there's a lot of those type of things that we see. And I think the courts just, they feel like it's pretty much overwhelming for them to do all this. It's a lot to take on when they're so busy already and they're short on staff. But what we continue to remind everybody, we have the template. Clark County has, they've set the gold standard. All they have to do is implement that program. They don't have to go out and do all the research and the legwork like Brian and Fidelis have already done. And that's how we're encouraging them to do this. But, you know, we like I said, we've had numerous calls like this throughout the state. And now Representative Davis has introduced an omnibus bill that is putting a lot more meat on the original legislation, and it's going to make it a lot more, I guess you'd say, onerous on the courts to do some of this work, but it's something that has to be done. And there's many aspects and parts of that, and that legislation is being discussed and debated on the floor as we speak.
Well, Ken and Fidelis, thank you very much for being here with us to talk about this and walk us through how this tech can work. And so Representative Davis, thank you very much for being here with us. Now, with the Tiffany Hill Act being passed, municipalities and courts in the state of Washington are allowed to enforce this requirement of having a potential domestic abuser use ankle monitoring software to protect the victim. But it doesn't seem to be really being utilized in a lot of places. Can you tell us a little bit about why you think that is?
Sure. So the largest barrier to utilization currently is that there aren't vendors that actually offer this bilateral electronic monitoring that talks to the victim as well. In most other counties outside of Clark, where it's being so heavily utilized. Interestingly, that particular company has offices in other counties, but those counties, for whatever reason, we haven't seen that kind of uptake. I think, like so many bills the legislature passes, you really need a champion locally. And Clark County, because of the tragedy that had occurred with the murder of Tiffany Hill, there was this inspiration and motivation to really get this going. But it does require work. It requires somebody to convene meetings and spearhead conversations. The technology is extremely effective, but it requires multiple steps. There have to be memorandums of understanding with local law enforcement, response times, a victim buffer zone set up. There have to be, court procedures and court forms and conversations, and those just haven't happened in earnest. I think there's a lot of issues and pressures being put on the courts, backlog of cases. COVID made things difficult. COVID, of course, occurred essentially the very same year that bill passed. But that being said, I don't think any of those things excuse the lack of traction that the implementation of this bill has gotten, and candidly, the lives that could have been saved. Because while COVID happened right after that bill went into effect, two things happened. Alcohol purchases went up and firearm purchases went up, and related to those two things, domestic violence soared, including DV homicide. And so of all the times we really could have used technology such as this, that functionally it's not available to victims really outside of Clark County, and some minimal use in King. So just incredible missed opportunities. We just had a terrible tragedy in Redmond, in East King County, a stalking case in which a protection order was issued and a couple was still murdered. And we know that protection orders, about 40 to 60% of them are violated. There were 15,000 violations of protection orders in Washington state last year. It's the half of all crimes against persons are domestic violence, and many of those are protection order violations. And so the fact that we have this tool, we have this existing technology that can actually put teeth into that protection order, and a technology where elsewhere in the country there have been 0 homicides and 0 reassaults because it's that effective, and we're not using it, is really shameful, in my opinion.
I know you have some personal experience as well, with this hardware. I don't know if you care to share that just for everybody out there.
Yeah, I am currently a participant in this as a victim with the app, and I'll just say that it gave me my life back, and I mean that very sincerely. I got to go home after 7 months in hiding because there was a perimeter of safety established around my home. So perimeter of safety established around my work. I don't panic when I see a car that matches my perpetrator's vehicle, because I know that it's not him. If my monitor is not going off, the benefits just to my mental health and not being constantly hypervigilant, the benefits to my physical safety are profound, and it's really unfortunate being on the receiving end of something that has made such an impact in my life. That, I mean, there are tens of thousands of domestic violence victims in this state every year, and it's not available to them. It's basically justice by geography, and that's incredibly painful, particularly for me, knowing what this can do for victims.
I know you've got your new House bill that's it's going through right now or in the process. Can you tell us about that and how that would maybe address some of these issues that you're talking about?
Sure. House Bill 1715 is pretty comprehensive, but there are portions of the bill that relate specifically to this, the Tiffany Hill Act, or electronic monitoring with victim notification. And one of the things that it does is try to set up statewide standards. So the technology is more complicated than just sort of slapping an ankle monitor on a perpetrator and giving a victim an app. Again, there really needs to be particular processes and procedures set up, arrangements with law enforcement for response, and those have not been established universally. And so we're seeing kind of these one-off cases in which victims are falling through the cracks, things are missed. There's one jurisdiction not talking to another. If it's being utilized in Clark County, that's all well and good, but what about a victim or perpetrator who lives outside of Clark County, and those jurisdictions have no policies and procedures? So what this bill would do is set up statewide standards and hopefully really raise the profile of this technology statewide, and hopefully pique the interest of courts and law enforcement and prosecutors around the victim benefits. But really looking at, I mean, the incident that just occurred in Clark County, there was a district court that ordered the technology and the perpetrator was released without the technology being attached. Like, if we had statewide standards for such a technology, it would hopefully prevent those sorts of errors, which of course can be tragically fatal.
As you can see, this is a very complicated issue. There are a lot of factors that go into it, but as House Bill 1715 continues through, we'll make sure to keep you up to date. For Fox 12 Oregon, I'm Greg Nibbler.